I was saying earlier, I feel like because a lot of my research has been on the work of Liz Rhodes in particular, but I'm sort of channeling Liz if she was here. I'm sure many of you saw that beautiful piece of hers, like music. And also perhaps because I spent quite a lot of time researching expanded cinema, whereas you two have just been busy making it, if we could call it expanded cinema, which I guess we were also talking about over our cup of tea, weren't we? That it's not necessary. I mean, there's so many different definitions of it.
Oh yeah, I mean, I can argue at least 4 different definitions. I get called an expanded cinema cineast, an artist, a structural filmmaker, avant-garde cinema. That's the one I'm forgetting, that they all come along to haunt.
Experimental?
Experimental film, yes, that's right.
Which is your favourite?
Artist.
Guy? Any
Simple.
artist?
Yeah, I think I've grown into that label. But originally I guess I would have said filmmaker, but it was a very difficult word to use, filmmaker, because you'd immediately start talking about the wrong kind of film. And it's very hard to get people to think about film in other ways.
Yes, and now it gets film is now, well, what is? I mean, I use film as a lazy reference to a new work, but actually, film is a medium. It's celluloid. It doesn't exist, or it's on the way. It's a dying medium, and
no, it's not.
You and Tasker can argue the point.
No.
Yeah, but no, it's
a lot of people working with film.
I know there are.
And I mean, you know, if the Lumières could do it in 1895, we can do it now.
And there are still violins.
But but at the same time, we are at the Hepworth, which is about sculpture, many things as well. But I think what I've really enjoyed about seeing this programme is, whether we call it film, moving image is the other thing that gets used a lot. It's like a neutralising term. It's about when film is touching on all sorts of other media, and it doesn't exclude other media. So it's both. I mean, it's sculpture.
Yes, sculpture's the other one that I'm perfectly happy with. But the problem is these terms have changed their meaning in the last 30 years. I mean, film did refer specifically to a medium, and it's also a general term for movies and so on. And, now we have the word cinema. Are we got a bit of feedback coming up?
My cop's going to get that first.
That'll be good. When the term expanded cinema appeared, cinema meant something specific. It was a monolithic institution to do with going to the cinema to see movies. And certainly the early co-op work saw itself quite explicitly as oppositional to that. But in the last 30 years, we've seen a revolution occur in which cinema in a movie theatre is one very small instance of cinema. Cinema has fractured and gone in every direction thanks to the digital revolution, such that we can get cinema on a little device, we can get it on the side of a building, we get it on the internet, we get it in a movie theatre, we get it in galleries, we get it at home. And so the word cinema has lost its big C and gone small.
What was it? I think Jill Everly used to refer to. She said it was popcorn. We called them popcorn movies, and that she, in a very really just dismissive way.
Right.
That was a very much the other.
Yeah.
That you really. She said it wasn't like we were against it. We just really had nothing to do with it. Is that right? In terms of when you were both.
Yeah. I mean. Yeah. Well. I mean, the discussion was about this idea of illusion, and that any form of illusion was anathema, that was something one should avoid. I mean, I never reached that line because I like to play with illusion, the material illusion in some sort of dialogue, actually. So I wasn't sort of fully in agreement with that, but I wasn't very articulate either in terms of what my position was. So, but it was a coherent, strong position that film is it's moving shadows. That's one way of looking at it. but it was definitely oppositional to mainstream cinema. It was also oppositional to galleries, I think, when it started out. And I came out of painting, and I certainly didn't feel like I belonged in the gallery. It seemed a slightly corrupt system, does that still apply? I felt I'd lose my way in the gallery, and
What year are we? Years are we
I'm talking about 1970-ish, 79,
Because
well, I finished art school in 70.
Yeah. But in 70, 71, I don't remember the galleries exactly falling over themselves to show our kind of work.
Absolutely not, no. And there's very few people. David Dye managed to have a dialogue galleries, and he showed his Super 8 work in sort of certain there was also the problem that, you could understand why film, it didn't have the possibilities of projection now. I'm talking about cellular film, because polyester film was brought in the 90s or so, and then the looping systems were perfected. So now you can have 16 or 35 mil films just running on loopers. You still need a lot of money to make prints. That's the big Tastadine show in London that we went to recently, and that's got 35 mil, 2-screen, 35 mil loops going around for several months, and that must be a huge amount of money. So all those things have made projection of film in a gallery much more viable, and I think curators have started to understand that more, and take the risk.
But I suppose it must have been at that time also that film was understood as the popcorn movie. So because there were far less people working with the moving image, even though you had experimental film, and also the economy in the market was so different, wasn't it?
There was no economy. That's the thing.
Yeah.
That's why
there was no economy.
That's why it was hidden. It was below the radar. It was between the cracks. It was all those things. Any other metaphor like, but yeah, because there's no way of making money out of it, and people weren't interested in it for that reason. But the amazing thing is, there's always been this hardcore international enthusiasm for this medium, or for these ways of working. So there's something in it in terms of an art form, but people haven't until recently found ways of making money out of it.
Yeah, your economy is very simple in the 70s. You would show at an avant-garde film place like the London Filmmakers Co-op in London or the Collective Living Cinema in New York, and the arrangement would be very normal. You get half the box office. So half the box office are 25 people paying $5 each. Well, you do the math. That's your annual income.
Yeah.
And so it was people taught, or they found another way to make a living.
Yeah.
Essentially,
Yeah.
a lot of painters I knew worked in bars until they got gallery.
Quite a few people did woodwork, like Will Mill became a carpenter, Mike Dunford became a carpenter.
The sculptors were usually very good at plumbing in New York.
And you became
graphic designer.
designer.
Yeah, I designed and edited art books for 20 years.
Philip Glass was a plumber, wasn't he? Philip Glass was a plumber.
He was a plumber.
Yeah.
He passed his tools on to the painter Power Booth after he retired from plumbing to play music full time.
I hope this
I've
is
always thought
giving
it was-
those art students here some food for thought about
Be afraid, be very
choices.
afraid. No, but I've always thought it'd be a very interesting book, a small book, to be researched with hundreds of artists describing what they did for a
It's
living.
being recorded, so we might have to hold someone to that.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, thinking back to, like I was just saying to you, I really love the slide projection piece. Have you seen that, Guy? The beautiful upstairs, which was at Gallery House, and that seemed to be a space, because I remember Annabelle showed there, and other people. They were really sympathetic to artists working across all sorts of different media.
Yeah.
And
Sadly, they lasted only for a year and a half, and they did brilliant programs during that time.
Yeah, and it seemed that it was a mixture of not just experimental film, but video, performance.
John Latham showed there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's sort of, I guess what I'm getting at is, I'm thinking also to your early fireworks as well, that it was coming from painting, but also from sculpture, but also from land art, from performance.
Yeah.
I also think experimental music doesn't get acknowledged enough.
No, indeed not. And I think it's hugely important, particularly around the figure of John Cage,
Yeah.
And I saw a piece by Cage at the Roundhouse in 1972, which I was absolutely astonished by. And I think in a way influenced my attitude toward what an audience does. So, for instance, the piece was called Harpsichords, and it was a huge multimedia piece with hundreds of screens up in the ceiling with projections and slides and film. But I barely noticed those, although that was the main feature of the work. What I noticed was that on the ground, forming a circle with a 40-foot diameter, were 7 harpsichords in a row, evenly spaced. And at each harpsichord was a harpsichord player. And each harpsichord player was playing the harpsichord, only they were each playing their own piece of music. There was not one harpsichord playing the same thing. So you walked into this space and you walked into what appeared to be a cacophony, glorious cacophony, particularly if you stood in the middle. But you soon discovered that if you moved yourself toward one of the, or other of the harpsichords, as you went toward it, that harpsichord sound would swell up as the others diminished. And you realised that your role as a listener and a visitor was to make up a piece of music. And I thought that was such a profound structure. And I'm sure it's sort of somehow informed Lines Drumming Care, which I made only a year or two later.
The Hamburg New Year ship's folkhorn kind of concert that happens has that sense of a sort of
You
spatial.
say a bit more about that, though.
Oh, well, I've never been there. I've actually been in Hamburg, but I've never heard it. But it's apparently this New Year, all the ships across a wide area in Hamburg Harbour, play their folkhorns. But when you think about what you're listening to, because of the way that sound travels slowly, it takes a second to, is it 4 seconds to go now? Everyone in different parts are going to be hearing a different thing, and in different volumes, different timing even. Isn't that roughly what you're saying? So where you are will determine...
Well, what's interesting about the question I would ask about Hamburg, which I don't know about, is was there a score, or were they all improvising independently of one another?
Were they all improvising?
Well, either way, it's quite interesting. If you can get... I mean, there is a score if there's no score, but everyone's agreed to play at a certain time. So that's in itself a decision.
I just saw this
I love the
fantastic
idea.
show. There's a really great show at the Chelsea Space, which has got the work of Ania Lockwood
Yes.
and others.
She was one of the organisers of the music festival at the Roundhouse where I heard harpsichords.
Ah, okay. Because she's really into the visual schools. She's done this work with burning pianos. But also they had the work of the Fluxus, Alison Knowles.
Sure.
And so maybe it's that idea of a school being almost like an instruction,
yes.
or in text.
Well, Fluxus as a movement were very fond of instruction pieces. George Brecht, for instance, all of his work was little cards with instructions.
Have you ever worked with that at all?
I make a score for any piece I make, which tends to be fairly explicit until after I've made it, and then I change everything. But
no, go back. But after you made, you change everything.
yeah, well, you have to make, if you're going to make a solid light piece, you've got to decide what you want. You've got to write a series of instructions for the programmer, in my case, in order for him to write the script for me. But then I get it back from the programmer in a form that I can change every single detail, and I'll spend 3 or 4 months in the studio playing with it, changing it, and trying to break my own system.
All right.
Which is the great thing about a system.
Is that, Guy? Do you break your system? Your system?
Do I have a system? I'm trying to think working methods. I mean, I'm adjusting things, like with these performances. I'm trying to kind of find a way of cutting the screen that works best. So I keep trying different ways.
Yes, the way you cut it was really somehow got symmetry.
It's okay with it?
Yeah.
Well, I work on feedback.
Right.
The music kind.
Yeah.
But, sorry.
That's fine. But I'm still struggling with this question about the system. But carry on.
Okay. Well, I was going to say that an example of another Cage piece, which I mean, he had a school. He gave a class at the New School in the late 50s, and many of the students were Alan Capro, Jim Dye, a lot of the painters were there. And the reason they were there, in a way, because they were making happenings, performances, artist performances without a script. And the question was, how do you structure it?
Yeah.
And Cage, as a musician, talked about nothing but structure, whether it's chance or whether it's... And all this goes back to his night when he taught at Black Mountain, at North Carolina? Yeah. In the 50s. And he had Rauschenberg, Merce Cunningham was there, lots of artists. He did something called The Event. It was untitled, 1952. Which is considered sort of the first happening, really. It influenced everything that followed. And what he did was, there's all these people he could call on who were colleagues or students. So he had Rauschenberg was doing white paintings at the time, and M.C. Richards was writing poetry, Merce Cunningham was dancing, so on and so on. And he gave them all a role in his performance. But he basically said, well, you decide what you're going to do. I need to know that. But what I'm doing is I'm making a time structure for everyone. So he assigned durational slots. So if you were the poet, you would have a slot. It would say something like 2 minutes 20 to 4 minutes 30. Read, and then there'd be nothing to do for another 10 minutes, and then there'd be another time slot. And he gave a time slot to everything that happened, including a phonograph machine, and all kinds of other events. I think there were 7, 8, 9 things that went on, and he created slots for each of them. And that was his structure. And so it made a completely coherent performance without, and this came as a real blinding insight to artists who were working with performance for the first time. I get it. What I have to do is actually have to work on duration, on the durational structure, much more than I have to work on.
So coming back to you too, would you say then that, I mean, it's funny because when I was writing and thinking a lot about Annabelle Nicholson's work or Jill's work or Liz's work, I found I kept coming back to Cage and wondering and thinking, could I say that Cage is it a direct influence? Is he just in the air? Or, you know, would you say that in a way you were quite inspired perhaps by seeing the piece at the Roundhouse, but then it's part of all the other stuff that was inspiring you at the same time perhaps? I don't know. Guy,
I found him hugely suggestive, and still do. I think he had a pervasive influence, actually.
Would you say that too?
Yeah. Cage and Fluxus and Annabelle, through to Annabelle, as Simon's influences, definitely. Yeah.
Maybe you should describe one of Annabelle's pieces.
Well, before you do that, I just on the Cage thing, one of the films that I sometimes show to my students, because it's online, is a performance he did called Waterworks. It's a very bad kind of video that's made, but gives a great idea of Cage in action. It's very, very funny, and students love it or hate it. That's always good.
Yeah.
I'll
Check
bear
it
that
out.
in mind. Yeah.
Sorry, what you saying?
Well, nothing. I mean, in fact, I wanted to just, thinking of structure, it's really interesting to hear how you come up with something and then you go back to it and go back to it. And it's really, I don't know how many people here have seen the other paper landscape. Has anyone else seen it? On Lynn? Yes. So it's very, very different. And of course, you've seen it as well.
No,
I haven't seen paper landscape till today.
No, so we haven't seen the old version.
Because the old version is on Super 8, is on 8mm, isn't it? Projected from 8mm.
Yeah.
And I could see that because you made it in 1975, it was getting to be quite problematic because you're going in and performing it. Your body is in there however many decades later. So it becomes a little bit about aging, about mortality, in a way that evidently just wasn't what the piece was
No, it wasn't
about.
part of the original concept. It was, at the time, it was a kind of joke, you know. What if I'm doing it in my 70s. Well, I am nearly 70, so hopefully
You're now talking about which piece you're talking about?
well, either
Man
of
with the
these-
Mirror.
either of those.
Man with the
either.
Mirror is the same.
Because they're both.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah, I
both
would have
Yeah.
made that
younger
description of Man with the Mirror.
and older me. Yeah. No, that wasn't the original idea. It was more. It was about space and inside, outside, illusion, material, if you like. Yeah, all those things. All those kind of things we got excited by. It wasn't about people. And the only reason it's me doing it is because I was available.
Yeah.
You know, I guess I could have had somebody else, but they'd have to always be available to do it for me. So pick up the mirror and do it myself. So that's why I'm not really acting, I'm just doing the job. You know, I'm not self-consciously being myself.
No, you're not. Of course not. No, it's a job. You have a job that gets done.
Some work, and I just happen to be there.
Yeah, you really get that sense that,
But,
I don't know what you think, Anthony, but it's a real sense of concentration, of getting the angles right and moving it. It doesn't feel like you're trying to make a spectacular performance.
No, it was absorbed in things that had to be done to realise the performance, which is, which Simone Forti, the dancer, was very involved in too, with the idea of the task. You know, if your task is to climb up a 45-degree slope by pulling on a rope, you're not really thinking about your choreography at that point. You've just got to get the damn well up there.
And not fall down.
Yeah,
And drop the mirror.
That will be an example of, and in fact, at Judson they did do performances like that, and there's a tremendous absorption that comes from being able to watching someone actually doing something they have to get done.
I thought I'd just throw into the conversation a man who does have a connection between Anthony and myself, because we didn't actually really meet in the 70s.
Did you not?
Did we?
I don't think so.
I
No, we
don't-
might have through Anthony Howell, maybe.
Well, I don't think so, actually.
Okay.
Did you just
Because-
not cross it? Because I
Well,
guess
no, because-
you and Carolee were moving.
Yeah, we moved to New
To-
York from London in January '73.
I started
So
getting
I
involved
missed
with
the
Carl
whole-
around 72, and Anthony left in 73.
Ah.
Yeah.
So, no, we didn't really cross over. I think I did see his man describing the film fairly early on at the, what would it be?
Probably Co-op.
The dairy?
Yeah.
The dairy, yeah.
Okay.
But we do have in common an artist called Anthony Howell, who is a dancer, and he had this group called Ting Theatre of Mistakes, as well, I'm sort of bringing it up, because the one I really recall is he set these dancers all off in certain sort of motions which they had to carry out regardless of bumping into each other occasionally, and hence Theatre of Mistakes. So there's a sort of, sense of, or chance interacting with the system, I suppose.
Yeah.
That could be, same with people interacting with your pieces upstairs, is exactly
Yeah.
what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was funny, and the kind of question I did have slightly was, because I was watching Line Describing the Cone, it's such a pleasure to see, I feel I've seen it in and the same with like music. All of you have seen it in all these different contexts over the years. And every time it's different. And it was brilliantly dark, this one. So it was a real sense of you disorientated at first, and then it starts. But for some reason, there wasn't so much of the hazer coming up to start with. So at some points, I don't know if anyone else was this, I was standing there and I couldn't really see anything. And then there would just be a body intersecting with the beginning of the line. And I kept thinking, what would it be like to show this? And I wanted to ask if you ever had done this without any smoke machine or anything.
Well, yes, I have.
So that actually the line is described by bodies intersecting rather than smoke.
Ah, well, it actually produces something of a disaster.
Oh.
And I can give you a date to the disaster, my first awareness of a possible disaster, which was in Sweden at the Malmö Kunsthall. I'd been invited to be, I was in a show there called New Media, which in 1975 meant photography. Photography infiltrating the art world through conceptualism. Anyway, I showed Line Describing a Cone one evening there, and there was quite a large expectant audience, and the film started. And after 5 minutes, I wasn't sure if the film was actually running, and after 10 minutes, I was really worried. And then I realised that the problem was that the air in the museum, a new museum, was so clean, there was not a single bit of dust in the air. And also, it was so healthy that no one was allowed to smoke. So the combination of the absence of dust and the absence of smokers meant that the film, the volumetric part of the film, was invisible. So all there was a projector at one end and a little line going round. And I have to say, I was impressed that about 45 people stayed and watched the line complete itself without having any of the gratification of, you know, like a sculptural object. But that was a very serious problem.
It is very gratifying seeing. It is very gratifying seeing a line.
It is.
Yeah, but But the thing is, I came back from that with the knowledge that I had a problem on my hands, because I'd made most of the early solid light pieces by then, and I had just discovered that they could not be seen. They were invisible, in fact, particularly in this new context. I mean, in the old context was the dairy, the London Filmmakers Co-op, and the collective living
so there was enough dust
downtown
and
lofts,
yeah.
which had only recently been manufacturing or sweatshops or something. So 10 people walked in, there was dust, and people just did smoke. But to have that missing meant that I'd made a bad aesthetic mistake about what was possible. So I did actually stop for a while. I thought for a year or two. Actually, it stretched into 20, but that's another story.
So you did stop for a while because you just wanted to go off and do other things.
No, I stopped for a while because I realised that I'd made a really bad career decision. There was absolutely no way to make a living from doing this anyway. In any way you cut it, there was no way really, unless I was to move out of New York and teach or something like that, maybe. And I chose instead to practice graphic design. And I, of course, worked with the same art world that I thought I was part of, only the gallery side of it. So I was doing museums, and I was doing books and catalogues, editing them and designing them. And that did just stretch into 20 years. And during which time I was aware that there was this sort of question, but I didn't see any way to solve it. And then in the 90s, certain things happened. Video art suddenly reared its ugly head and entered the art world in a way, and which meant that the galleries were actually showing moving image work. And the other thing, the most important thing of all, was the invention of the haze machine. Isn't that a funny thing? that little black box.
When was it?
Well, I first became aware of the haze machine in about 1995. They're probably around a bit earlier, but
Didn't they use that
So
sort of
you
thing in
were
theatres
waiting?
sometimes?
yeah, but they're
Before?
sort of big smoke machines, great big sort of belching,
yeah.
what I call rock and roll machines. You know,
Mm.
the roadie gets it out,
Right.
pumps it out. And so this a haze machine with very fine calibrations sort of appeared at that point. So the combination of knowing that there was a possibility of showing work if I made it, but most important of all, if I made work it would be visible,
Yeah.
were two very important things. And by the end of the 90s I started again.
And I remember very strongly on Shoot when we did that. Mark Webber curated that at Tate.
Yeah.
We showed
Yeah.
line describing a cone, and how that was just I don't know if anybody saw it there, and it felt very like, why haven't we seen this before? This is
Yeah.
amazing, and it
Yeah.
did feel, in a
Yeah.
sense, it kick-started for a younger generation, for all of us, an opportunity to
And-
see all your work.
And the show that Chrissy Isles did
Into
in
the
the Whitney,
Light,
Into the
yeah.
Light, which is about American artists,
Mm.
but it was it created a who knew reaction from all the artists that were doing video.
Oh, right.
They had no idea that this is prehistory based on film, and so that was a very salutary thing actually that these shows occurred. And then, of course, what happened is by about 2002, video projection began to get quite acceptable in quality, which had never been before, because video art in the galleries before that had been on monitors.
Yeah.
And so it was quite different from film, and film still seemed to the galleries rather foreign. But once video began to be projected, then the differences between film being projected and video being projected were much smaller, the distance between them.
So you put down the graphic design tools and thought, right, I've waited for the technology to catch up with my
Yeah.
ideas.
Pretty
So-
much. I mean, I suppose there was a question of why I didn't do some other kind of art during the period.
But you did have another kind of art. which was the political work, which you did.
Yes,
That's true,
good.
I've got that.
Very, very good
Which,
point.
yes, that's right. The discursive films, which I made in the late
How many of
70s.
those were there?
Two, was Argument and Sigmund Freud's Dora.
Right.
And in retrospect, those were, in a way, particularly Argument was a sort of protest at the ghettoization of avant-garde cinema, in a way. I mean, you can look at it that way. Because the fact is, I was doing this mostly in New York, not in London, but showing at the Collective Living Cinema or Millennium Film Workshop or Anthology Film Archives, they were the three places really in New York. One was very aware that you were showing to each other, that was it. And of course that's great to have a milieu which creating new dialogue and so on, you get new work out of it, but also that feeling of being completely cut off from the real culture was uncomfortable.
But I seen those films. It's really good that you brought those up, because I was thinking about this on the way up here, thinking about if we'd have a chance to talk about them. It did seem there was a lot at stake in them around questions of gender representation and all these things, which are, I mean, I kind of wonder, the fact you made those, but you also make these, how can you, this is quite a difficult question to answer.
It's a big one.
It's a big one, yeah, but you know the question I'm getting at.
What's the question?
How might you relate them?
Oh.
The fact that you made Argument and Sigmund Freud's Dora,
Well,
but
I
you also
mean,
made Lines
I mean,
and Cone.
I can't really relate them. They were very different animals, but the fact is that all artists at any moment are opportunistic, and you try to follow your nose and try and find a way to go forward in something that seems interesting. And at a time when I had already abandoned the solid light work as being unviable, and also having been a little felt a bit cut off by how we had to show that work anyway, just to each other, it did lead to an interest in politics. And it so happened that I met someone then, English friend, who came from journalism, and also with a tremendous knowledge of the discourse around Screen Magazine and about commercial cinema, which I didn't really know very much about. He, on the other hand, knew nothing about avant-garde cinema. So a friendship began with us going to the pub and talking about these two very different poles. And it was out of that discussion of the differences between the different kinds of cinema that our discussion just moved into a project in the end, and we made Argument, which was widely disliked when we made it. And, it's a little hectoring. But the odd thing is that now we're in a much more political time.
Yeah.
Now, I would almost say it's popular.
I mean,
if there's a screening of it,
yeah,
the screening will be full of people.
It's busy, because you're touching on stuff that stuff is at stake again in that way.
Maybe one of you could give a short description of what it is we're talking about here.
Oh, blimey. I think
I could give a very short one. It's a 75-minute essay film, let's call it, and it takes on a lot. One of the things it takes on is the question of how to act correctly, in a way. I mean, I'm not talking about political correctness as a cliche, but it was a sort of agonised question, because it's sort of impossible in the end. Yes, this, but not that. And the film took the form of a sort of montage. Formally it was examining the codes of sound, text and image, and in all kinds of combinations. So you'd have one section which was all text, another all image, another all sound, one that's all three, one that's only two of the three, and so on. And it was very dense and repetitive, I think, in a productive way. And it also left out feminism.
But then you made
deliberately. Well, we left it out deliberately because we were two men about to make a political film. We thought, not going there, in a way.
Best not.
And then our feminist women friends who admired the project very much said, "Yeah, but come on." So we said, "Well, okay, what should we do?" They said, "Well, you do what everyone does in a situation like that. You start a reading group.
And these are now very popular again.
Yeah, and then out of that reading group developed the film Sigmund Freud's Dora, which was a explicitly feminist reading of Freud's first
and
case
you've got some
history.
fantastic collaborators on that.
Fantastic collaborators, and including Claire Pianchowska and Jane Weinstock. And it's still in print. I mean, it's still being rented. So in that sense, a very successful political film, I suppose. But on the other hand, after doing those two films, I didn't much like. In fact, I discovered I didn't much like the sort of disputatious quality of political discourse. I didn't find it, in the end, for me, very productive. The great thing about doing projects like that is it's very important they should be collaborative. I mean, that's exactly how you should practice, if you're doing political work. And I think in the end I found that I preferred to work on my own, which is not such a good way to go about that kind of thinking.
Yeah, because then you have very much a kind of one single authoritative voice, which
is
it's difficult when you're looking at political
The best
questions.
you can hope is it's poetic.
But anyway, the technology caught up with you, your ideas. But you've really, again, Guy, it was interesting to see Paper Landscape, this version, because I'm used to having the clatter of the projector in the background when I see it, or Man with Mirror, I missed this time. But and you've always worked quite explicitly with film as a medium, and I think some of your I really love some of your early sound. I mean, there's a real connection to light music in the sense of the idea of sound as image and image as sound in some of your works. Do you feel that you're able to work as productively now with what the digital can offer? I don't want to get into a big dialogue about the digital because it's just tedious, but...
I mean, there's all kinds of exciting things. Yeah, I do enjoy it. It's just a frustrating medium in many ways, but because I'm not sort of technically that great at it, but I have Lynn to help me out. Thank you, Lynn. I enjoy it. There's things you can do in it, but it's a different medium, and I'm sort of happy to work with both, but in quite different ways. But maybe that's enough on these things. I mean, I'm just wondering whether we could have a conversation in case there's somebody got some burning thing they want to ask or say or something.
Or say, yeah.
Do you have a microphone there?
Well, we thought it didn't have to be a question, it could be a comments as well, or thoughts.
Raise your hand. Otherwise, you don't.
Well, or we could go on talking while people work out what they want to say. Oh, that's put a real stop to it. I'll do a time check. Not that I'm in charge here, but...
I've got a watch on, so we've got about half an hour.
Oh, right. So we'll stick it out for another half hour.
I think, I can keep coming up with the questions, but I promise not to talk about the digital anymore. Digital versus film, because that does get really... I mean, that's been rehearsed so many times.
It's not an opposition, really, is it?
No, that's the point. When
exactly.
I said film isn't dead, I mean, people have said that for a long time. Actually,
It's been dead very productively for a long time, hasn't it?
Because I curated this exhibition at Camden Arts Centre, and I remember William Rabin, that was 2012, I think it opened. William Rabin said film will be dead by the end of this year. Well, I think it was next year, he said. And David Curtis said, we'll all be dead before film finishes. So I think I would go with David's account there. I think I find it productive to work with film.
Yeah.
It's got qualities which you can't. I mean, the whole thing about process is very alive in film, which is not. I mean, I know the digital world has its own processes, but they're so different from filmic processes. If you scratch a film, you see it on the screen.
Right.
If you scratch a DVD or some computer chip, I don't know what you're going to see. So it's that kind of relationship between the physical the thing that's churning through the projector is on the screen, which can have this amazing relationship, you know. And a number of artists still, I mean, Bruce McLuhan in New York, for example, has done these very powerful works where he makes it very clear he's in the space, he's got his 4 projectors and they're putting loops through and he's doing amazing things with sound, you know. It's a very physical kind of experience, which you get in a very different way with, say, Anthony's film. It's kind of physical too. My daughter, I actually managed to capture on my phone, saying it's like, I'm swimming, and I'm in space, and all these things. It's that kind of physical kind of engagement with those sheets of light. But you know, I mean, I've been teaching most of my working life, and students still are amazed at the film. They love it. They like working with it. They just realise they can actually touch the material and create something directly with the physical material film. And you know, I think there's a rebalancing going on between, you know, this what seemed to be a sort of overpowering surge of the digital world taking over everything, and then I think there's a sort of, you know, it's a bit of a comeback, sort of fight back or a rebalancing.
Well, it'll come.
Yeah.
I mean, I like the idea of film coming to the rescue of the digital, which is what one reason that film may very well survive quite comfortably is because it's the best conservation medium.
Absolutely.
Where a digital asset may last for 5 years maximum before it has to be reprogrammed or recoded. Whereas if you put that, if you transfer that file to 35mm film and bury it in a proper vault with air conditioning and all the rest of it, that colour film will last for 100 years.
Yeah.
And could be re-digitized at some point in the future, you know. I find that a delicious irony. That the survival of a dying medium will actually be necessary to save another one from dying. And it did look a few years ago as if film was going through a death spiral, but I have the sense that it's been a sort of pulling up a little bit. Kodak have committed to keep on making film and the chemicals, which they had not really promised to do before, because it looked pretty dangerous. But it seems like there might be a measuring out. But certainly from a conservation point of view, that should survive. It should guarantee its survival.
And many directors choose to shoot in film, so the negative is film, and they transfer to telecinema and they finish.
Yeah.
So in fact they're working alongside each other quite productively in dialogue rather than in opposition.
And I've actually made at least one or maybe 2 pieces which use both mediums together. So I've got a film being projected and video as part of it.
But there's one thing that's interesting about, you know, I'm always struck, particularly Anthony, when I see your work in the context of a gallery, and then I get to see line describing the cone and the kind of is the difference in time and duration which you can be offered
between a once through screening like we saw. Line describing a cone in this showing was a once through showing with an assembled audience, which was how it was made, how it was imagined when it was made, and that was the context. But when Chrissy Isles invited me to be in the Into the Light exhibition at the Whitney, which was about 2001, to show line describing a cone in it. It would have been very, very challenging for the museum to keep having screenings, and it didn't work for how audiences come to museums. They come and go on their own time. And so for the very first time, I agreed to put the film on a looper, so that it became a continuous installation all day long. Now, this wasn't too much of a stretch, since most of the solid light films in the 70s made after that were all designed as cyclical works with a continuous duration. They were not finite length works at all. So I was familiar with the thinking, but I'd never done it before for line describing a cone. And what I discovered is that you know, it had completely different emotional qualities. I mean, there's a unique intensity that comes from all of us seeing it together. As it comes to a close, there's that anticipation, and then the disappearance of the object, you which you don't have with the continuous showing, or at least you don't share it with someone. But on the other hand, a typical showing of line describing a cone in a museum would get, say, 40 people in it. And by the end of this exhibition, which was 3 months, we'd had hundreds of thousands of people who previously had never seen anything like the work in this exhibition, film work.
So was it
And
about
so I think the trade-off is actually was a very fair one. But I mean, all the new work I make is made with the assumption of a cyclical structure within a continuous installation, and I'm comfortable with that kind of structure. It means you structure the work differently. I mean, it's a completely different animal. Line describing cone arguably is a narrative film.
Yes.
It announces its purpose and it delivers it by the end, you
Yeah.
know, and it goes from A to Z.
Yeah.
But all the other solid light works cycle.
Yeah. Did you find it quite liberating in a way to suddenly start to think away from a narrative because of what you could be offered by the technology?
Yes, well, the reason I went to cyclical structure in the first place, which began in 1974, was that I noticed that I liked the idea of a visitor, you know.
Rather than a viewer.
When I'd been doing fire performances in landscape, I found that people came with expectations that would not be met. So, landscape for fire sounds like fireworks, you know, and people would come expecting something pyrotechnical. Whereas I thought I was making a rather sort of slow sculptural experiment, and that the visitors were witnesses to it. And I realised that if I extended the duration to so long for a work, that it was impossible to come to see the whole thing. All you could do was visit and live. That in a way sort of took away that problem of expectation and drama and everything. And I transferred that idea to film and liked so much the way it worked. And as it turned out, that was the ideal structure for a museum anyway, when I began to make work again. So I felt that it was a very practical structure, one that was really very open-ended. There was no limitations I was worried by.
I don't know if that's... I mean, you haven't tended to work in... do installation work.
Well, actually,
I've seen some
in
beautiful
Andrew's
installation
introduction, he left
works.
out my most recent gallery show, which was at Christine Park. No, I'm not blaming you. Which was, 2-3 years ago now, in a gallery, a small gallery in London called Christine Park Gallery, and took some of my, there was a couple of new pieces, but there was mostly works from the 70s, which were 100-foot camera rolls, where you see the burning of the lights, and then burn out. So the light burns into the image, and then it trails off at the other end. So by looping that, it's actually quite a nice cycle. So
3 minutes, like
3 minutes, but they fade out to light and they fade back into the image. And they keep going on.
Yeah,
Like
beautiful.
that. And this is another thing, but I didn't just show them on the wall. I made some intervention so that they were shown onto. Sometimes I'd paint part of the screen black, or put it partly into a mirror, or whatever was appropriate to the actual sort of film content. So yeah, I've done it, and it was nice. I had 7 projectors, 61 projectors just rolling away, set up by David Lester, who's the man who does 16 projectors.
Can't live without David Lester.
Yeah, you use them too, right?
Often.
Okay. So
He's a filmmaker himself, but he's also a technical installer of 16mm film mostly.
And he has patented a looper.
Yeah, he's made a very
That's right.
effective
You're
looper,
making it
and he owns a lot of projectors, and he can turn up and just do all the installation work. And it's
when I
a skilled
mentioned,
job.
the invention of polyester in the 90s, if it was the 90s, and the looper, I should have mentioned David Lester.
It's just as important. It's unthinkable one without the other.
And people like Stan Douglas will only use David
Okay.
to help them install their work.
Yeah.
But I do find it slightly worrying because it makes you realise that this kind of work is dependent on having that expertise around, many cities wouldn't have that possibility.
But the other thing that I feel very strongly about, and you must do when you teach, is that projectors and things are so easy to use, and they often get treated as a sort of this old piece of archaeology or something.
Oh, you mean film projectors?
Yeah, film projectors, but also setting up loopers and all of those sort of things. But actually, they're very easy to use, and I think when always try, if I'm doing a screening for people and projecting on 16, to get the students to lace it up so that they've got, going back to what we were saying, they can work across all the different ways in which you can show moving image.
Yeah.
And not feel that something is somehow barred to them because it's this
Sure.
little bit of kit.
But there are real difficulties. I mean, film projectors are no longer manufactured, for instance. So it means that there are fewer and fewer in the world as time goes on. I mean, I think personally they would be easy to make in a machine shop. They're not that complicated.
No.
But still, the fact is that Iki and Elmer and all those people, they stopped making those projectors, and so the number is getting reduced each day. So I think that's a real difficulty. It may rescue itself in the end.
Every single school institution in the country would have had an IP projector at one point, to show educational films or whatever. So there are thousands and thousands.
They're floating around.
Hmm?
They're floating around.
Yeah, and the beauty about that particular projector, so this is getting really geeky, they're Japanese projectors, but they're built on a sort of modular basis, so if a part goes wrong, you just take it out and put it in from another machine. I've got 10 of these at home.
Have you really?
Or a few more, actually. I've got a couple of David Lester's burnt out ones because he had a studio fire. But the parts inside were fine. They don't look very nice on the outside, but they're great parts.
I'm sure you've got a few here as well. Or William's got some, probably quite a few.
Yeah.
Are there
It's
any?
Cleveland's near here.
We could just carry on chatting away. Happily, but I feel that many of you were in the screening, and probably, I'm sure, would have something you might like to share, or add, or question.
It's really interesting to listen to. Oh my goodness! It's really interesting. I didn't realise I was going to be on a microphone. It's very important myself now. But I'm just wondering what about us? We're listening to you, but what about us? We've come here now as an audience, and people are in the galleries upstairs as spectators, and I just wondered where you place the people that come to see your works. Are we spectators? Are we witnesses? Are we collaborators? There are people dancing around your sculptures upstairs, Anthony.
Real dancers.
Real
Yes.
dancers, creative dance taking place.
Yeah.
So what is our role? What do we have to do? Just listen to you? Watch you? What's our role?
Oh, that's a good question. Difficult one. Well, my sense of things is that, the artist has a certain relationship to the work of art. You make it, you think it through, and you have your own ideas about what it's about. But actually, the important relationship is that between the visitor or the spectator and the work of art, and that's a completely different relationship to mine. And that's where the question of meaning comes in, which is placed there by the person looking. The thing that I can't possibly know about who's going to look is where they're coming from, what their interests are, what their experience with other things like this might be. So it's a completely open-ended thing thrown out with the hope that its audience, collectively and individually, will find something of interest in it, and pleasure and beauty and so on. And I don't anticipate that. I don't know. I can't know that. Who everyone might be and what they might make of it. So in that sense, making art and displaying it is a sort of act of faith. And I'm always interested in what people have to say about it. But they can't be wrong. In other words, the visitor looking at the work's going to take what they want from it and through it, and that'll be that. I don't know if it answers the question exactly, but that's my sense of it.
Yeah. I mean, I just ask that people are open-minded and, you know, engage with work. But in a way, your question is the wider question about all kinds of art practice, isn't it? It's not just us. I mean, we have been going on a bit, I admit, so apologies for that. But I was just thinking, arriving in Wakefield, which I'd never been to before, and I used to teach in Wolverhampton and go there every week to teach, but it felt so much like Wolverhampton. And you know, and then like probably every city is the same, you know. Same shops on the high street, everything's the same. And what's everyone else doing today? They're watching the royal wedding and they're going to watch the football afterwards. So surely a space for a kind of another kind of things happening apart from these hugely kind of popular mainstream things is vitally important. You know, I mean, I guess it's just a plea for diversity. You know, I don't think we're just we're not. I hope not presenting ourselves as. I mean, we're on a slight pedestal here, a slight thing, but I'd rather that wasn't there. You know, on the same level as you, and maybe not in rows. I'd rather it was more of a circle to have a discussion, and perhaps that if it feels like a barrier, is that what you're getting at actually? Some sort of barrier between the artist and the audience, because you could be an artist. You know, I mean, you might go away and be doing something with this. What?
I was thinking more about whether you're influenced by our reactions.
Ah.
Oh, that's a different question.
I think there's something interesting
Well,
about
certainly.
codes,
When people give me
actually.
feedback, that's why I like feedback. You know, it can
think it
change what I
depends.
do.
Yeah, I think it depends on what the comments are. Really. I mean, you know, making work is sort of a bit like plumbing. You know, you're just putting formal elements together, which come to you as an idea that might change the way what you're doing might look, something like that. And so, if you said you thought everything was too fast, then I'd be curious about that. Let's say why, you know, and that might be informative. But if you said really it's rubbish, then that's fair enough comment, but there's nothing to discuss.
I think one
I
thing
think it
neither
does
of you are
depend.
saying, though, and sorry I'm interrupting, is there's the one thing you're speaking as artists where you're saying, quite rightly and very in a kind of modesty, this is the work I make and I open it up to you. So in a sense, both of you have an act of generosity there. But at the same time, and I don't know if this has anything to do with what you're thinking about, I was watching Liz's piece, like music, and thinking, oh, this is interesting. Because the last time I saw it, lots of people were coming in and out, and you're nodding, I can see. And I could see with the way you were moving around that you had seen it in places where you'd walked in and out, you know, and when it was installed at the Tate, people were just going in and using it like a kind of shadow play. But this time, I really loved it because there was a sense that we were really listening in a very particular way. So the point I'm making, I suppose, is, and I wondered if this is a little bit where you come at, is the idea of how we interact and what the codes are that we have about how you behave in a cinema, how you behave in a gallery. We got to duck under the beam. We can't be in the beam. And yet when you go into the gallery up there, there's lots of, and I love the way you say it's a sheet of light. It is. So there are kids sliding in and out of it. And so in a sense, there's all these different modes of behaviour. What are we allowed to do? What are we not? And I think often that can make things feel slightly awkward. But actually the thing I find very exciting about that is with that awkwardness comes a moment when you're really thinking quite deeply about what it means, what you're listening to and what you're engaging with and what your body's doing in relation to it. And I think ways that are really quite exciting, which is what's always excited me about expanded cinema, is it's somewhere in between. But I don't know if that was anywhere, those awkwardnesses were anything that you were thinking about.
I'm thinking a lot of things at the moment. And therefore I'm giving a reaction to the works that I've seen today, which is, they've made me think quite a lot. Parts of them I was enraptured with, and parts of them I haven't a clue what was going on. And I'm really struggling with some of the things I've heard and seen. but I guess that's what art is about.
When I always say to my students, when I've shown them, generally I've shown them something like Michael Snow, and they're complaining, and I go, yeah, you may not like it, but you ain't ever going to forget it. And, you know, I think that's what you've seen today is probably, it's indelible, isn't it? Whether you might never work it out. That's my feelings often anyway. That's what keeps me excited about what you do.
But I think sometimes one's response to the work is to do a context. So Sharrett's piece, what date is Sharrett's piece?
63, I think.
Yeah, I mean that's quite an early piece in terms of this kind of work. I think Arnold Freiner, which is a film by Peter Kubelka, predated it. I think, yeah. I think it's about 59, which was just black and white flicker. And those films can be quite hard to look at in a way, but in the context of when they're made, they're very radical films. I mean, the whole way of treating film as a medium which just negates stories, plot, all that kind of stuff, but deals with rhythm and light and colour and the interaction of colour, and in fact the wave patterns of sound as well as part of that too. It's a major radical departure, even though it's uncomfortable viewing, and even though I completely understand one stumbling upon that film and thinking, what in hell on earth is this about? So I think the context, that period of time in New York, Buffalo, I don't know, with, I like that, the Flicker Boys, are they called?
Flicker Boys.
Yeah. They were in action, yeah. Tony Conrad also did a Flicker film. That was about 65, I think.
Flicker, yeah.
We've got to, I think, I'm getting the wrap-up sign. So I don't know if there were any last comments, thoughts that anybody had.
Following on from what I quite liked the fact that it creates boundaries, but there's boundaries there that are there to be broken. So when people walk in and out of them, it's quite interesting seeing the reaction and the different effects that creates. Whereas it's completely different to a static piece of work that's in front of you. It's something that you can interact with, which is nice, really. It's just a thought, like. But,
Yeah.
Got a chance, we've got probably a few minutes to come back on.
Well, thank you. There's no question that these kinds of works that we've been looking at this morning do have the power to incorporate their audience in a way that's quite different from a sculpture made of steel, say, or for that matter, a painting. And that kind of incorporation is sort of almost part of the medium, which you can assume. And it creates difficulties because I'm sure you notice there are probably moments where somebody would step in front of the projector or something. The thing vanishes, of course. It's now you see it, now you don't. It's completely immaterial. It's weightless. It can occupy a lot of space, but it's really quite different from, say, a Richard Serra sculpture or work of that sort.
Can I just add a little comment about, again, the sort of your show rather than sort of the cinema screenings. I also saw your show down at the Serpentine some time ago. I remember really being struck there that, by a piece where it was a line on a wall that was divided by people walking in front of it, so that the line moved and divided depending on who was walking in front of it. But in that sort of case, it was the person wasn't really visible. You just saw their effect on the line by the fact that the line disappeared. And in this show here, particularly, there's this ones with the screens in, but also on some of the projections on the walls as well. It seemed like the person themselves became much more visible because you could see their entire silhouette, or there was a little, as well as the line being broken by the person, you could sort of still see a bit of a shadow. And I don't know whether that was something to do with the way that the projection was different, if it was digital or something, but there was a very sort of vague, a little bit of light that meant that the person's shadow was visible. So I thought that was sort of, you know, again quite a different thing in that the viewer or the person who's actually been, their image is being brought into the piece itself rather than just their effect being felt on the artwork itself. I just wondered if that was intentional or
no, from my point of view, they were works in the Serpentine exhibition work. They're different work ones from here, but they are the same kind. So I think it might have just been perhaps the stage the particular piece was at, which when it was very simple. I think the one you're talking about was it was a double projection, horizontal in orientation. Is that right? But I'm not quite sure why it should have created that different an effect.
right.
Yes, we should finish, but I'm not sure if we'll be around a little bit longer if people have got questions, but thank you,
Of course.
and thanks for a great programme.
No, thank you.
It was a really
Glad you liked
fantastic film programme.
Thank you all for coming.
Yeah, thank you.